Hello, guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. I don't know why I say it like that. Today, we're going to be going over the Barbarian skill that's probably seen the most changes and the most love and the most hate over the years, and that is Whirlwind. Whirlwind is a very strange ability that doesn't really work the way that you think it does, and maybe through this video I can demystify Whirlwind for you a little bit, explain some of the new mechanics with Whirlwind, how the ability works best, and maybe what is the best weapon to use with it. Whirlwind, first off, let's just go over how it levels. So you'll notice that right off the bat, we only have about 30% damage increase, and it has a mana cost of 12.5, which is kind of insane. And it drains mana ridiculously quickly. So as we level it up, we have to obviously put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points just to get our first level of this ability, which is a lot. It's a lot of points to have to put into to get to Whirlwind. And you'll notice that even after putting 1 point into it, and with 7 plus the skills, I'm only at 90% increased attack rating and 70% increased to damage. And the mana cost has increased to 16.5 from 12.5. The mana cost keeps going up. And as you level up Whirlwind, you get very paltry increases in damage and very paltry increases in attack rating, but the mana cost continues to increase exponentially, literally to the point where at level 27 you're costing 25.5 mana, not per attack, but like per second. It's because when you use Whirlwind, it doesn't work the way you think it does. Like, it's not like, okay, I'm just going to use Whirlwind and that's it. It's almost like you're casting an ability every time Whirlwind is utilized. So let me figure out, like, let's do Canyon of the Magi. So when you tap the button, that is one use of Whirlwind, right? So when you just go boop, that is a use, all right? So if you hold down the button, you can utilize huge amounts of mana with Whirlwind extremely fast. You can burn all your mana away in next to no time whatsoever. And for this reason, Whirlwind is just like crazy when it comes to its mana consumption problems. You are going to need a large amount of mana steel to make up for this. And on top of that, I would recommend a healthy amount of damage taken goes to mana. Damage taken goes to mana is pretty much like the best way to deal with the huge mana cost problems with this particular ability. Because as you are whirlwinding through the monsters, if they hit you at any point, you will regain large amounts of mana for every single time that they are bonking you. And this allows you to sustain those very heavy whirlwind mana costs relatively easily. And even if you run out completely, you can just let them hit you a couple times, and your mana will start to come back relatively fast. Now, the way that damage taken goes to mana works, if you guys are completely unaware, is every time you are hit, it will take 50% of the damage that was dealt to you and add it to your mana. A lot of people, for some reason or another, and I don't know why, because it never said this, a lot of you have assumed that 50% damage taken goes to mana meant that it would take away mana from your mana pool instead of your health. But it doesn't take away mana. All it does is if you take 100 damage to your health pool, you will still take 100 damage to your health pool, but it will divide that in half, and it will go, okay, well, since he took 100 damage to his health pool, we will take 50 mana and add it to his mana pool. Damage becomes life, but you still take the damage. And so as you're whirlwinding, you're going to be able to sustain your mana pool a lot easier utilizing items that have high amounts of damage taken goes to mana. Now, 50% damage taken goes to mana is a ton, and it's usually more than you will need on a Barbarian as you're leveling up. And the super ridiculous high mana cost on Whirlwind pretty much requires you to use large amounts of mana steel along with damage taken goes to mana to fix a lot of those issues. In fact, if you've never used a Night Smoke on a low-level character like a Paladin, a Druid, a Barbarian, any characters that have relatively low mana cost requirements but have, are actually in there in melee getting beat up on a regular basis, Night Smoke makes most of those problems go away for a very long period of time, by the way. Now, when it comes to this particular character, utilizing Whirlwind, there's a large number of weapons that you can go with. But it's important to note that Whirlwind doesn't actually do what it says. So you would think that the Barbarian is just swinging his sword around his head, and he's just like slashing everything around him in some sort of AoE damage effect. But that's not actually what Whirlwind does. Whirlwind is actually just a very fast sequence of attacks that go off ridiculously quickly and will hit a single target or any target that is nearby in that time period that you pass. So for instance, if during this time I attack 30 times, so I'm literally stabbing the air 30 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and I move from point A to point B, any monster within that field can get hit by those 30 attacks. Okay? Now, if there's 30 monsters and I pass through 30 monsters, each monster might only get hit one time. If there's one monster and that monster stays with me the entire time, he could potentially get hit 30 times. But the number of times that each monster is hit is dependent on how many times you attack when you're passing them. And in the past, your attack speed with Whirlwind was determined by your weapon, and only your weapon. But in 2.4.3, they changed Whirlwind so that attack speed could be modified by increased attack speed from items. Like, for instance, the 25% IAS that is on my gloves, the 15 or 30% IAS that is on my Mortal King's Crown, the things like High Lord's Raft that have 20% increased attack speed on them. All of this will have a bearing on how many attacks per second the Whirlwind ability is actually doing. Now, if I switch to a slower weapon, like the Breath of the Dying Warpike or the Breath of the Dying Thundermaul, these are very slow weapons, and they're very high damage. But as I'm passing by a monster with these weapons, what you will notice is that I don't really get off as many attacks per second as I do with the faster weapons. So, like, if I were to go over here to Frigid Highlands and have a little bit of fun whirlwinding, you'll notice that I can hit maybe like 1, 2, 1. Like I'm passing through and I'm hitting a target, but a lot of the monsters are not getting hit as I pass through. So it's more like 1 or 2 hits per pass, which means that I'm doing a really large amount of damage to that one monster that does happen to get hit as I'm passing through, but not as much to the group. And this is kind of one of the problems with Whirlwind, is that when you attack slowly, you don't really attack as many times, which is why a lot of people tend to gravitate toward weapons that are faster rather than slower, because the faster weapons will hit more times as you're passing by, dishing out more damage to the area effect. As you can see, when I'm swinging my little flesh rippers, the monsters are getting absolutely annihilated because I'm tapping them many, 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 many times in that same time period as when I'm going through with some of the bigger, more exhausting weapons. Another issue is range. So range complicates this entirely. So already, when it comes to Whirlwind, as we were discussing earlier, the monsters are only getting hit a certain number of times as you are passing through. So if I only, say, make 5 attacks with my spear as I'm passing through a group of monsters, then I'm going to hit however many monsters are within range, maybe, 1 time or 2 times each, depending on how many monsters there are. However, if I'm using a max range weapon like Breath of the Dying, which has a range of, I believe it's 5, which is the Warpike is a 5 range weapon, which is absolutely insane, by the way, I'm going to have a chance to hit everything as I pass through, which means that my damage is going to get spread out even more to even more monsters, to the point where literally I'm hitting basically everything once, but nothing is really actually dying in the process. Let me find a nice big group of monsters here to show you what I mean. We got some bugs. Here we go. We got some bugs. We got some doodads. Let's get them all nice and grouped up here. Probably going to kill me, but that's okay. And we're going to whirlwind through them. And one thing that you're going to notice is nothing really dies. The more monsters there are, the less dies per second, because the damage is being spread out so much that you've got to sit here and you've got to keep whirlwinding back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and eventually something will die because the damage is getting spread out so much from the long range of the weapon that it doesn't really do as much as you would like. Now, switch over to something like the Flesh Rippers in a very similar situation, and what you're going to notice is that despite there being a huge number of monsters, the Flesh Ripper will still kill monsters very effectively in those large groups, because of the short range of the weapon combined with the fast speed means that it's going to be able to focus its damage on those targets and finish them off much more quickly. We'll see if I can get another group going here. Not quite as big as the last one. All right, here we go. We've got a couple more. Let's get them all nice and corralled. Now, as I go through them with the Flesh Rippers, what you're going to notice is they're going to die really fast. It's going to pick off each individual target as I'm passing through because the damage is more focused on the individual monster. Because of the short range of the weapon combined with the fast speed, I'm hitting one particular monster a large number of times as opposed to everybody like once. And this is the reason why I found the Flesh Rippers to be one of the most effective whirlwind weapons in the game. Number one, because they're one-range items. So that means that their damage is focused very, very tightly on the target that you're actually trying to hit. Now, there is obviously other options, like, for instance, Grief is also a very nice whirlwind weapon. And Grief has a 2 range when it's in the phase blades. However, when I was testing between Grief and Flesh Rippers, I often found that Flesh Rippers were faster than Griefs. Because the Griefs would spread their damage out a little bit too much within the groups, and the Flesh Rippers would focus it a little bit better. But as you can see, both the Griefs and the Flesh Rippers are very good at focusing the damage on the smaller targets, on the individuals, getting that damage into the monsters and making sure that it's actually killing them, as opposed to spreading it out the way that the larger, longer range weapons do. Both of them extremely effective, as you can see. Now, we also need to talk about some other things when it comes to Whirlwind. Most namely is what Whirlwind does when you're actually in the Whirlwind effect. So when you're in the Whirlwind effect, you cannot do anything. You cannot switch weapons. You cannot drink potions. You cannot chance to cast. You cannot chance to strike when monster hits you. You cannot do a lot of things. There is tons of things that do not work when you are in Whirlwind. However, there are some things that do. Very interestingly enough, one such effect, which I think is the only one that actually works, is Hits Blind's Target. I don't know why Hits Blind's Target works and nothing else does. But Hits Blind's Target does actually work while you are in Whirlwind, and it works very well. And it is one of the abilities that I would recommend if you want to make a very effective Whirlwind Barbarian. Now, there is a particular item in the game that does have Hits Blind's Target on it that I can show you right now, and that is Last Wish. Last Wish is super expensive, but it does have Hits Blind's Target on it. So I'm going to hop into one of these tombs real quick and show you what I mean. Notice, as I'm whirlwinding, I am applying Hits Blind's Target. I don't know why specifically Hits Blind's Target is the only effect that actually works with Whirlwind when everything else has been disabled, but it works, and it works extremely well. And I also think that Hits Blind's Target is also very interesting from a certain perspective with Whirlwind because it shows you how the ability works. Because every time you hit a monster with Hits Blind's Target, it applies the Hits Blind Target to the monster. It shows you more accurately how Whirlwind applies its damage. So as I'm whirlwinding through the monsters, you see the monsters have the Hits Blind's Target applied to them. And you notice that it's consecutive. You can actually physically see the hits being done and the Hits Blind's Target being applied to the monsters as I travel through. Now, granted, Hits Blind's target doesn't work on bosses, so that is a rather unfortunate thing. But it certainly does make for a much safer whirlwind, because as you are whirlwinding through, you don't have to worry about taking as much damage, because the monsters are nice and blinded. Which means all the ranged monsters, all of the caster types, are going to just sit there and do nothing as you whirlwind away, whereas the melees will sit there and do nothing and not chase you down. However, it is important to note that when a monster is blinded, the monster can still attack you if you are within their light radius. So let me see if I can find a monster real quick and blind him just for demonstration purposes. One of the big old beasties down here would work really well if I could find one of them. Well, this guy will work. So when he is blinded, as long as you are outside of his light radius, you're fine. You notice how he has a very tiny light radius when he is blinded. And then when he is unblinded, all of a sudden he can hit you. If you walk within his light radius, he will still attack you. So this is important to note when it comes to the blinding of monsters, is that when you're whirlwinding, if you don't want to be hit by a specific monster that you've blinded, you have to make sure that you don't go through them. Now, you can go around them. This is interesting because if you do have a longer range whirlwind item and you were using, say, a Last Wish in it, you could potentially use the range of the polearm to whirlwind around them in a circle, blinding them and keeping them blinded the entire time while you're whirlwinding. But with shorter range weapons, you would have to whirlwind directly through them. Now, due to the number of massive hits, as we're talking about, because Whirlwind applies so many hits so quickly, Whirlwind becomes a very interesting thing to apply effects with. So there are a lot of different things that you can apply as a melee character. You can apply Crushing Blow, which is very, very nice, of course. You can apply Deadly Strike, which is going to double your physical damage. You can apply Open Wounds with your Whirlwind, which is also very nice. Prevent Monster Heal, slows target. All of these things can be applied by Whirlwind as you are whirlwinding through. And, of course, some of them have better effects with speed. So Crushing Blow and Deadly Strike both get a huge bonus when it comes to how fast you attack. So the faster you attack, the more damage you're doing. And the more times that you can apply those hits when it comes to Crushing Blow, the more damage that you can put out. So having a large amount of Crushing Blow with Whirlwind is definitely very, very useful. As nice as Griefs are, Griefs don't have any Crushing Blow. So if you're going to run dual Griefs, you're going to have Crushing Blow from other sources, like, for instance, your boots, maybe some Gore Riders, maybe a very nice, like G-Face, maybe you'd be using something like Duress. But in general, you're going to want to build Crushing Blow, and, well, since Griefs don't have that, it doesn't really work out very well. On the other hand, things like the F-Zotted Flesh Ripper does have a very nice 25% Crushing Blow already, and if you combine that with some Gore Riders and a G-Face, you'd be up to probably around like 75% Crushing Blow with relative ease, which means that when you're attacking monsters, those ridiculously fast weapons, they're going to get ridiculously Crushing Blowed into oblivion. Now, IAS does affect Whirlwind tremendously at this point. And I've prepared a hacked pair of boots. Yes, I know. They're hero edited in. They have 107% increased attack speed on them, which is a lot. And I just want to show off the difference between something like Breath of the Dying with the increased attack speed and Breath of the Dying without the increased attack speed. I'll go ahead and put this right here. Because Breath of the Dying is by far... Actually, which one is slower? Is it the Thunder Maul? I think the Thunder Maul is slower than the Warpike, isn't it? It's been a little while. Let's go with the Thunder Maul. I think the Thunder Maul is the slower of the two. All right, so we're gonna play around with the Thunder Maul real quick, and I'm gonna show you the difference between the IAS and without the IAS. And this is gonna give you an idea of how many times a monster is getting hit with this particular weapon. So as you can see, this is without the IAS. I'm trying to whirlwind through this group. Nothing's really dying all that much. I might get a kill here or two, but in general, like, it's just not fast enough. And let's go ahead and throw the boots on. This is going to bring our total IAS up to 222%, which should bring us close enough to what we need to be. Let me go ahead and throw these buffs up here too. And with the IAS, what you're going to notice is that I attack more times per second as I'm going through the monsters, which does equate to more damage. So you can see even the maggots are dying quicker because I'm hitting each individual maggot faster. These particular Erdars are a little spicy, but in general we have more damage going out because I'm attacking quicker, which means more strikes per second as I'm passing through them. Now, the Thunderball is really not the best choice here. I actually really prefer these Flesh Rippers, and the Flesh Rippers also get the same benefit from the IAS. Now, there is a maximum cap on the number of attacks per second, but it definitely helps to have the fastest attack speed when it comes to Whirlwind, because that's going to give you your highest damage output. Another thing that you got to note here is that if you're using a big weapon, like the Thunderball, for instance, it's better to attack on the edges of the army. So what you want to do is you want to actually kind of like move around the edges and utilize the weapon's range. Let's switch to the max range one here. And what you're going to do is you're going to kind of like move around the edges of the army, the monsters that you're fighting, and not necessarily go through the center. This is important when it comes to Whirlwind, because if you're moving directly through the center of the group, you're going to have your damage get spread out way too much. Whereas when you move around the edges of the group, you can more readily focus your damage on the monsters that you're trying to focus your damage on. And with max range pole arms, you can really whirlwind like this way with excess. As you can see, I'm just kind of like grazing the edge of the monster pack, trying to make sure that my damage is being applied to as few monsters as I can at any given time. Now, I don't prefer to do my whirlwind this way. I prefer to do my whirlwind with the smaller weapons so that I can focus my damage on the targets that I want to focus my damage on. And I feel like it works better in general to be able to focus that damage on specific monsters this way. That way you can get in there, you can actually focus your damage on what you're looking to kill, and when it dies, it dies. And of course, those monsters are just ripping my mana away. I freaking chugged every mana potion in my inventory.
What do you need?
Buy a whole bunch of mana pots. Revenge of the mana potions. Now, this monster right here, he was almost dead. I mean, he would have been dead eventually. God bless it. Why are they so good at stealing mana? He's mana burn, isn't he? Stone skin, extra strong, mana burn. He is mana. Oh, magic resistant. Never mind. Stop knitting me sweaters. I don't care about your stupid sweaters. Now, what I'm trying to show you guys here is how Whirlwind doesn't really put out the damage that it should. It's a fantasy, right? Like, Whirlwind is a fantasy. It's the fantasy of the spinning top barbarian that hits everything around him in a circle. And basically what I'm trying to show you guys is that it doesn't actually work that way. That they don't actually hit everything as they go through. They just hit a certain number of times as they go through. So, for instance, even when you're using something like Grief, notice that we still have issues with physical immune monsters, like this particular one. But when it comes to these particular monsters, you're not hitting everything. And I think this is one of the biggest issues with Whirlwind is that it doesn't really live up to the fantasy that Whirlwind has. Like when you think about a Tasmanian devil like Barbarian spinning around and like whirling blades, you kind of like in your mind are thinking about a barbarian or like a character that is hitting everything as he passes through, like a giant shuriken that's been thrown by Naruto and Sasuke, you know, and like at like Mach 17, and literally just hits everything as it passes through all the monsters. But that's really not quite the way that Whirlwind works. There are some other things about Whirlwind that have been fixed, by the way. I feel like I should probably go over some of those. So in the past, there was a broken weapon glitch where if you had a weapon that was broken in your offhand, you could trick the game into thinking that you had two of the same weapon. That no longer works. In fact, quite a large number of the old Whirlwind bugs that you may or may not know do not work anymore. The new system has completely changed the way that Whirlwind functions and basically allows Whirlwind to actually utilize increased attack speed from, you know, off sources at this point. And also, you know, the base weapon speed also matters, but you definitely can make even something like the Breath of the Dying Warpike, which is extremely slow, into a much faster weapon. I think the main issue with the Breath of the Dying Warpike is not necessarily that it's slow, it's the range. I think the range is really the biggest issue with it. Because if you put it in a shorter range weapon, it tends to do a lot better. Now, I'm sure that I've missed something. With the new changes for Whirlwind, I'm not even going to be naive enough to say that this video is like a complete tutorial on Whirlwind. In fact, if any of you guys have any comments that you'd like to make down in the comment section about Whirlwind, things that I've missed, feel free. If I see something important, I'll pin it to the top. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos, even when it's a 27-minute video on Whirlwind. And as always, keep watching.